Colleagues, I'm going to call this meeting to order. Bienvenue à la réunion numéro 32 du comité.
Welcome to meeting number 32 of the Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans.
Of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people, and express gratitude that we're doing the important work of this committee on lands they've stewarded since time immemorial. Pursuant to Standing Order 108, the committee is meeting to continue its study of the factors determining opening and closing dates of marine harvesting seasons. La réunion d'aujourd'hui se déroule sur forme hybride.
Today's meeting is happening in hybrid format. Pursuant to the standing orders, members can participate in person or through Zoom.
In-person participants to consult the guidelines written on the table. And I guess we don't have any in-person participants here. Pursuant to our routine motions, I'd just like to advise committee members that all witnesses have gone through the required testing. And just for the benefits of members and witnesses, please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. And for those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you're not speaking. And
as far as the interpretation is concerned, for those of you on Zoom, you can go to the bottom of your screen and choose floor, English, or French. For those of you in the room, you can use the earpiece and select your desired channel.
Pour les députés présents dans la salle, si vous...
For members in the room, if you would like to speak, please raise your hand. And for the members on Zoom, please use the raise hand function. The clerk and I will do our best to maintain the speaking order, and we thank you for your patience.
Mr. Small wanted to raise a point here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just before we get going here, this study motion called for a 2-hour appearance by Minister Thompson. I'm just wondering, can the committee get an update on whether or not she's been asked, and if in fact she will be coming to this committee to testify on this study?
Sure. I'll just turn it over to the clerk to respond to that.
The invitation has been sent to our office when we started the study, and I don't have an answer yet.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, with that, I would like to welcome our witnesses. Participating via video conference, we have Melissa Collier, the commercial fish harvester, and we have Daniel Desbois, Président Association des Crabiers Gaspésiens. So we're going to start with the opening statements for 5 minutes or less with Melissa Collier.
Hello, and thank you for having me here today. My name is Melissa Collier, and I'm a commercial fisherman. My husband and I fish off of our 42-foot boat, the Lisa Jess. Our home port is Campbell River, and we reside in Courtenay, BC. Like most fishermen in BC, we are multi-species fishers. We fish for halibut, lingcod, swimming scallops, and salmon. I'm not an expert or representing any association or organization. I'm here to represent my family, our fishing family, and to present our personal experiences. Fishing is an unpredictable industry. Our lives are driven by the tides, the weather, and the life cycle of the very species we catch. There are so many unknown variables, and we often have to make big decisions with little notice and no information. However, there is some predictability we've come to depend on. We know that halibut season opens in March. We know prawn season opens in May. We know summers are spent fishing salmon, and chum opens in October. Fisheries openings, while subject to shift and change, used to be relatively dependable. We knew when to expect a notice. You knew when the opening would be roughly around the same as last year, as long as the fish are there. Abundance meant access. You could build a business, roughly plan your fishing seasons, but there's been a big shift in fisheries management. Notices seem to come later. The lead times from a notice to actual openings are less. Abundance no longer means access. When preparing for today, I really struggled to determine where to focus my words. There are so many examples of short notices and lack of clarity, such as how chum season used to consistently open in September now is common to get less than 24 hours for a mid-October opening. In the north, it's become common to only get 2 weeks' notice, which is not nearly enough when it takes me a week just to reach the fishing grounds. However, the story that stands out the most to me is our 2022 sockeye year. My family has 2 salmon licenses, an Area F Northern Trawlers license, which allows us to fish salmon around Haida Gwaii, and an Area H Trawlers license, which allows us to fish on the east side of Vancouver Island. There used to be a single salmon license for the whole coast, but in the late 90s, it was split into 3, and my father-in-law had the foresight to invest in 2 licenses. Because at the time, fishing in the north started primarily in June, July, and fishing in the south started in August. We having both allows us to access both areas in a given season and adjust as needed to the area that makes the most financial sense in a given year. However, that changed in 2019. Since then, our Chinook opening has been pushed back to the second or third week of August, a month or so later. Due to that later opening, we can no longer fish both our north and south licenses, and we have to choose, which is what we did in 2022. The big run of Fraser sockeye usually happens every 4 years, and 2022 is forecasted to be really strong. The sockeye and Chinook fisheries are financially comparable. However, the southern fishing grounds are closer, offload ports are closer, so the overall cost to access the fishery is substantially less, especially with the price of fuel. We chose to stay south. We got our boat ready, we got crew lined up, we stocked our boat with food and fuel, and we watched. At the end of July, we monitored test fishing. We called around and talked to fishers who had decades more of experience and knowledge to draw upon. Everything looked promising. It's definitely going to open, maybe a bit later than usual, but definitely the second week of August, we were told. The test fishing numbers continue to climb. FSC fishing occurred. It looked promising, but still no notice. Within the first couple of weeks, we still had time to pivot. We could change. We could head north. That's why we have more than one license. We can change and make plans to make decisions to compensate for when the fish just aren't there. But in 2022, that wasn't the case. The fish were there. Test fishing numbers were good. We had past openings with lower numbers. So we waited. And by the end of August, Washington had opened their salmon season. Catch report data showed that FSC fishing harvested over 670,000 fish. U.S. commercial fleet harvested over 318,000 fish. Cumulatively, over 1 million fish came out of the water, yet we still had no opening. After waiting an entire month for an opening that never came, we gave up, started preparing for our next fishery. The day we put all of our gear on for the new fishery, totally different gear, a notice was sent. Date of notice, September 7th, 3:12 p.m. Sockeye would open the next day, September 8th at 12:01 a.m. Less than 9 hours notice. Fishing was only allowed at the mouth of the Fraser River, where the fish are less value compared to where we fish in the Johnston Straits due to loader quality and the river coloration. The quota was set for 123 pieces per vessel, the value of which would barely cover the cost of my fuel. So in 2022, as a result of a delayed northern opening, having to choose between 2 licenses and a month late sockeye opening that was not financially viable, my family lost out on the income of 2 licenses and about a third of our expected income for the year. This is just one of many stories across fisheries and fishermen. I'd like to finish with a quick analogy on fishing. I find it's effective to explain our industry. Imagine you have a business, a store, let's say. You purchase the building, you pay for the electrical, the water, your business fees, any other licenses you need to operate. You have staff, you have equipment, but you don't have the keys to the door. You don't get to control when the store opens or closes. Most of the time, you don't even know when they're going to shut up with the keys. You just have to be ready and hope. That's fishing. Thank you.
Nous allons maintenant entendre Monsieur.
We will now hear from Mr. Desbois for 5 minutes.
Bonjour.
Hello, Chair, members of the committee. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to present the reality faced by the snow crab fishermen we represent in the Southern Gulf. Although we do not speak on behalf of all harvesters, the concerns we are raising today are widely shared in the field. From the outset, it is important to acknowledge that DFO has made significant progress over the years. Today, fishing plans are available earlier, license conditions are issued on time, and harvesters have access to all necessary tools, particularly online payment. Administratively speaking, the system is ready. However, despite these advances, a major issue remains: the operational capacity to complete ice removal on time. The system is ready on paper, but not at sea. It's also important to be transparent. This year, ice conditions in the Gulf likely would not have allowed for a much earlier opening, but perhaps by a few days. The problem that we're raising is not tied to a single year. The problem is not a specific year. It is the recurring delays. Each spring, due to uncertainties and delays and planning and executing ice-breaking operations, we systematically lose between 3 and 4 days of fishing that could be recovered. We're not asking for the impossible. We're asking to recover the days that are lost every year. This year is a very concrete example. Operations were initially scheduled for late March. They were postponed to April 5th and 6th and finally took place around April 11th to the 13th. At sea, several issues were observed. Difficult coordination between equipment, the use of icebreakers with varying capacities depending on the area, and above all, the absence of a tugboat essential for keeping the channels open. The result? This tugboat was unavailable and no alternative had been planned, and there were additional delays which added up. And once the icebreaking was done, harvesters still have to wait for a safe weather window in order to head out to sea. So the delays add up, they don't cancel each other out. Each day lost in the spring becomes very difficult to make up for. We need to understand a simple reality in our industry. A week of fishing lost in April requires about 3 weeks in June to achieve the same catch. This means that every delay shifts the fishing effort to a period when conditions are less favorable, when costs rise, and above all, when right whales are more and more present. We're shifting the fishing effort right into the highest risk period. And that's where there's a major inconsistency. Right whales began arriving in the Gulf as early as the first week of May. However, over the last 2 years, we have observed no interactions. Why? Because the fishery took place earlier. Protecting whales requires an earlier opening, not a later one. The more we delay the fishery, the more we increase the risk to the right whale. Another important issue concerns equity among regions. In Quebec, our harbors are generally not affected by ice. We are ready to fish earlier. However, the opening is delayed due to ice-breaking challenges in certain maritime ports, notably in Caraquet and Shippagan. Safe fishing in Quebec is being delayed because of a lack of planning elsewhere. New Brunswick harvesters understand this reality and share our concerns, but their dependence on DFO operations limits their ability to challenge decisions. Another key issue is the complexity of the decision-making process. The committee now includes over 100 stakeholders, which makes coordination more difficult and slows down decision-making. The diversity of stakeholders is essential, and we fully recognize the importance of the participation of Indigenous communities and all harvesters. The issue we are raising concerns the effectiveness of the decision-making process, not participation. We must ensure that this diversity can be expressed while allowing for quick and effective decisions on the ground. This issue isn't who is at the table, it's the table's ability to make decisions effectively. In our reality, every day counts, and this bureaucratic burden has direct impacts on the ground. The more cumbersome the process, the harder it becomes to respond effectively. Our position is clear and constructive. We want to maintain simultaneous access for everyone. But for this to work, DFO's planning must match the decisions it imposes on the industry. In concrete terms, this means guaranteeing resources, icebreakers, tugs, other specialized equipment, rigorous coordination, a contingency plan in case of failure. We're not asking for more rules, we're asking that the existing ones be enforced. And if these conditions are not met, there must be a flexibility mechanism to prevent the entire industry from being penalized by operational challenges.
Merci, Monsieur Desbois.
Mr. Desbois, your time is up. So if you could conclude your remarks. Yes, I just have about a minute. Finally, consideration could be given to establishing clear targets for icebreaking. For example, a reference date at the end of March to ensure access to docks in critical sectors regardless of conditions elsewhere in the Gulf. This would improve predictability, harvesters' preparedness, and the overall efficiency of the system. The problem is not the ice, it's the planning. Today, the system delays safe fishing, increases costs for harvesters, and shifts fishing effort to a period when risks to the right whale are higher. Better planning today prevents conservation problems tomorrow. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Desbois.
Round of questioning with Mr. Small for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to thank the witnesses for taking part in our study today. My question to Monsieur Dubois relates to his opening statement, where he mentioned the importance of avoiding right whales. So, Monsieur Dubois, with all the things that we've heard over the years, and we've had lots of consultations and whatnot, and we've spoken about gear technology and ways to avoid right whale entanglement, and it's been a priority to make sure the whales have been kept safe in your region. Is the number one way to avoid right whales by use of technology or by use of opening dates that keep you away from the whale migration?
C'est sûr que le pêcher quand la baleine n'est pas là, il n'y aura pas de technologie qui va.
Well, there's no technology that will replace what's done in.
C'est
As of now, technological tools aren't ready. They're moving forward, but they're not ready.
So with all that we've heard and seen and done, and in fact we've had a study at this committee over the last several years to study the right whale issue. Why is it that the government doesn't see the importance of avoiding right whales and the timely opening of your season the same way that you do?
Oui, mais en effet, c'est pour ça que nous, on demande d'avoir une date.
Well, that's why we're asking for an ice-breaking date, a date that will be known beforehand, and because these requests haven't been taken seriously over the last few years. It's been done very early at the end of March or at the beginning of April. And it should have started this year at the end of March, but it was done 2 weeks later, and that's unacceptable.
Quota for snow crab, I understand. Is correct?
Oui. Le problème, c'est
Yes. The problem is not the quota. It's the harvesting time before the arrival of the whales.
And you're ready to fish. You're just going to go out and catch your quota. So if you're ready to fish because your harbors are open and free of ice, why can't you go and fish when you're ready? You're only going to take your quota, and you're going to take it in a timely manner and be off the water before the right whales come. Why won't they let vessels in areas that are able to fish go take part in the fishery where you're just going to catch your quota, correct?
oui, c'est sûr, mais c'est parce
Yes,
que nos confrères des.
it's because we have a certain amount of respect for our maritime colleagues. We don't want to fish beforehand, but unless there's something preventing from us doing so, we'd like to have a start at the same time. But we're penalized a lot more in Quebec because we're not able to go out. We have to wait.
Consultations with Canadian Coast Guard, icebreaking, and DFO to get a reassurance that what happened this year won't happen next year?
Ben oui, cette année.
Yes. And it's kind of like the straw that broke the camel's back.
Tu es supposé garder le chenal ouvert.
And the tug that was supposed to keep the season open was having mechanical issues, and we were informed of this at the first meeting, but there was no alternative. And so the chair, the president had to come back to open the same channel because the tug wasn't available. It was broken down, and there was no planning
Au remplacement du tug.
to replace the tug. So there was a major lack of planning, and that's why we think that people need a date.
Est nécessaire parce qu'ils semblent se fier au quotidien de glace qu'il y a dans le Golfe.
Because they're having to deal with the ice conditions as they exist in the Gulf.
Would you like to outline a recommendation that we could put in this study report when the time comes.
Oui, nous, on aimerait qu'il y ait une date de prévue dans les...
Yes, we'd like there to be a date in the last week of March so that ports are de-iced.
Thank you very much. My next question is to Ms. Collier. Ms. Collier, why do you think DFO is not more efficient in making season openings that affect your livelihood so much?
I wouldn't begin to understand what goes into making those decisions. All I know is I experienced the outcome, and it just doesn't feel like DFO has the ability to make decisions fast enough or in a timely manner. A lot of our fisheries require in-season decisions, and it just seems the response time isn't there.
Thank you very much, Mr. Small. Next, we're going to go to Mr. Cormier for 6 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Monsieur...
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Desbois, I'd like to say hello from the other side of the bay. We're practically facing one another today. And Mr. Desbois, you know that I'm very much aware of the file that you're talking about, and we've been experiencing this since 2018 in the Southern Gulf and elsewhere in terms of ice breaking at ports and the season openings that are later or done earlier and early so that we're not in the same place as the right whales when they arrive in the Southern Gulf. And I agree with 99.9% of everything you said today, because I experience it every year. As you know, as you said, it's a lack of planning by the Coast Guard, but it's also a lack of tools at the disposal of the Coast Guard, which we require in certain areas, especially in the harbors that you mentioned, which are in my riding. So, Mr. Desbois, just to put things into perspective, the big problem that we're experiencing is that in 2 or 3 ports and in the channels that lead to them, unfortunately, the Coast Guard doesn't have large icebreakers that can come into this area, and the hovercraft is almost never available when we need it. And we have an amphibian vehicle, which we call the Frog, that comes and does some works at these ports. But since the channels are too narrow and too shallow, we don't necessarily have the necessary tools to open the season as quickly as possible. So in the current context, on your side of the bay, your harbors are usually free of ice before ours. So would you agree to say that, one, the Coast Guard does not have the tools that we need to open these 2 harbors in Caracat and Shippagan as quickly as possible, to start the season as quickly as possible? Yes. There are certain vessels that could do a better job, but they're never available, or they've been assigned elsewhere. That's one of the problems. For example, the hovercraft, we know that it's going to be prioritized for river regions. In Quebec, they're used to de-ice these areas so that there are no floods. Is that still the way it's happening? Yes. And that's why we want to do the de-icing early.
Tout à fait d'accord avec vous.
And I agree with you, but there's only one hovercraft. So my question for you is, do you think that we have the necessary tools at the Coast Guard to do this ice removal quickly? Or are we missing tools? We don't have small icebreakers, and we don't have a hovercraft for a unique region like ours in the Southern Gulf. Yes. At the end of the day, Mr. Desbois, DFO wants to protect right whales, and I think that your industry recognizes that we have to do so, but at the same time, we're putting a lot of pressure on the industry so that there are no interactions with these whales, but we're not providing the necessary tools so that you can do so. So if I understood correctly, what you're proposing is that we have more equipment capacity to open these harbors. Is that right? Yes. If we want to remove ice earlier, we'll need the necessary tools. Over the last few years, Mr. Desbois, we could say that the season has started relatively early. There are even years where there was almost no ice, and so there are even seasons that began extremely early. Yes, over the last 2 years, things were good. The majority of quotas were reached before the arrival of the right whales.
Monsieur Desbois.
One point, Mr. Desbois, and perhaps I'll have the opportunity to ask you questions later. So it's not that I'm in disagreement, but I have a major concern, and the whole industry has it. You said that some regions were ready to fish before others because there was no ice, and I understand that. But imagine the fact that for some regions, the idea of going out before other regions, for example, if yours went out before the Calicut-Sheboygan region and before the fisheries, the dockside economic activity was significant. There were harvesters buying equipment, fuel, there were restaurants. So imagine that if one region starts before another, wouldn't this mean that some harvesters would have to go to other regions to moor their boats there? And that would mean a loss of economic activity for some regions. Yes, as I said, we're proposing a simultaneous start of the season, but the federal government doesn't have the means to provide the necessary equipment, and this creates difficulties for everyone. And we're not able to reach our quota because the beginning of the season has been delayed by 3 or 4 days, and we'll end up finishing in June. So we don't want to be penalized. We understand the impact of all this. Absolutely. And I understand you 100%. And you've explained it well. But this is why I'm making this comment, and I believe you mentioned this. At the current time, do you think that we are missing certain tools in order to start a season earlier and simultaneously for everyone? Yes. I'm sorry, but our time is up. If you could answer the question very quickly, and we'll have to move to our next member.
Pour avoir un brésilien à faible profondeur, faut avoir l'accès.
Yes, in order to have this ice removal, we need a tug and we need all the necessary equipment. Thank you, Mr. Desbois. Thank you very much, Mr. Cormier. And now we're going to move to Mr. Deschênes for 6 minutes. Thank you, Chair. Hello, colleagues. Thank you, Mr. Desbois, for being here. I hope everything's going well in Hopetown. And I'd like to summarize what I understood from your presentation. The bureaucratic machine at the DFO and at the Coast Guard are moving too slowly. They're slow to act to free navigation channels in the Acadian Peninsula area, and this is causing you issues. First question, why is it important that the crab season starts as early as possible? Well, it's to avoid interactions with the right whales. We have quotas. And if we start a week or two later, things end early, but now the right whales are arriving in June, so a number of areas are closed. And these are major fishing areas. So it concentrates all fishing efforts in the same places, which makes fishing more difficult and more costly. So what you're explaining is that fishing days in April means that resources are used much more effectively than in June. Yes, as a result of the closures of areas, and these are enormous areas which are close to fisheries, and this means we have to go a lot further from the Quebec's coast. We need to go towards Cape Breton, towards the Ile de la Madeleine. So it's about a 15 or 20-hour trip or even more. It increased costs. And if there's a major concentration of harvesters, so we end up catching a lot less and it's very costly. So you are in the same area as our friends from the Canadian Peninsula. And out of equity, we want all harvesters to begin at the same time.
les voies de navigation.
So it's important that shipping lanes are de-iced. And as you mentioned, the decision-making process, well, how are decisions made operationally between the DFO and the Coast Guard? How many people are around the table? How do things work?
Ce qu'on appelle le comité.
Well, we've got a committee, an opening committee, and it's normally managed by traditional fisheries, and there are a number of stakeholders. Now there are 105 people at the table. Representatives from all provinces, indigenous groups.
Ben, nos gars, Joe, à la table pour décider
Various small groups.
Ouais.
And so all these people are around the table to choose the opening date. It doesn't work. So there are a lot of people around the table, and so the council is very representative, but is it effective? Well, it can't be effective because the opening committees, well, there's dredging done in some areas.
ça est rendu partout, puis plus il y a d'intervenants, ben,
And so the more stakeholders there are, the more we see little problems that don't end up getting resolved. And people from a small area who have 7 or 8 vessels, they represent 1% of the quota, but they have problems heading out to sea.
un vote, mais le vote représente pas vraiment.
And their vote doesn't really represent the volume of what they fish.
Libération qui complique.
So there's a deliberation issue. And in terms of the DFO's and the Coast Guard's ability to act, if we make a decision that we want the season to open at such and such time, do these groups have the capacity to intervene? Well, they don't have perfect tools.
M. Cormier disait
As Mr. Cormier was saying, we never have the right icebreaker, and the Frogs budget isn't high enough for it to do what's necessary.
le TOC n'était même pas disponible, mais il était manqué à passer
And the tug wasn't even available,
du tout, puis il n'y avait rien pour le remplacer. Là.
and there was no tug, and there was no way to replace it. And weather is changing in the Gulf.
Ça va s'en aller, là.
The speed at which the ice is moving, and if we had an ice-breaking date selected beforehand, if everything was planned, then things would be better. It would be easier to plan if we were to have this date. So this year, what's happened in practical terms? Well, the icebreaker was supposed to come at the beginning of March,
Là, ce qui est venu,
and it's there was a fairly large icebreaker that came and did some work, but this one can't come into the interior. So one was supposed to come at the beginning of March, but it came on April 5th or 6th, and it did one channel, but it can't go all the way to Shippagun because it simply doesn't have the equipment that the hovercraft has.
il est reparti.
So it did its work and it left, but the tug wasn't there to keep the channel open.
Personne n'avait l'air de savoir. Là.
And no one seemed to be aware of that. So was it covered in ice again? Well, it was closed.
Le deuxième briseur a été obligé de revenir.
And the second icebreaker had to come back and do the same job that had already been done. And then we had to wait for the hovercraft.
Pour garder le chenal ouvert. Là.
And so a lot had to be done to keep the channel open. Thank you very much, Mr. Deschênes.
Our second round of questioning with Mr. Gunn for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Collier, you were talking about the failure and delays to open the sockeye fishery despite near record amounts of abundance back in 2022. It also happened again this past summer. From your vantage point, are these decisions being made at DFO have any correlation with abundance, with science, with evidence, or do they seem to be being made based on ideology or other factors?
I have no idea how those decisions are being made, but once upon a time, abundance meant opportunity and access. Abundance no longer means that. We'll see huge runs of fish, and yet not be able to access them. Part of it is some of the information we use is test fishing, and we can monitor test fishing, see the numbers that are coming back. In the past, you could usually use that as a fairly good gauge of whether or not the fishery was going to open. Now it's not. It's very unpredictable. Sometimes the numbers are good, but we don't get it opening. Sometimes the numbers are not so good. You mentioned the 2025 sockeye fishery. I know you mentioned that or discussed that a lot in the last panel. For reference, the Area H trollers, the hook and line fishery, did not get any opening for the 2025 despite that historical run.
And their families, they're okay with closures, they're okay with restrictions if they're genuinely based on conservation concerns. But the other side of that coin, the other side of that bargain has to be that if there is abundance, people should be allowed to get out and fish.
Absolutely. Nobody wants to fish if the fish aren't there. It's not economical. It's not good for the population. But if the abundance is there, we don't understand why we're not able to fish.
Have you noticed as the decision-making process around these openings and closings and how it's been communicated to you changed over recent years? Can you give us a bit of a, go up to 30,000 feet and take a historical look back in time?
Sure. I have two really good examples. Our chum fishery in Area H before 2019 consistently opened March 28th. We knew it by clockwork. The fishery is managed by fishing days, and there's a peak of a run, so you have to fish X number of fish days before the peak and X number after. So guys would just find out when that peak was, and then they would look at the test fishing and use that to gauge whether or not they should get their boats ready, when to expect fishing, when to plan their businesses, when to go. After 2019, we had a historically low chum run. Ever since then, there seems to be a new arbitrary opening date of October 12th. Not that that's an official thing. It just is what's on our notices. And the lead time between our notices and the actual opening date ranges from 5 days, 3 days, 8 hours, 10 hours. And it's completely fluctuating. We also no longer know where the goalpost is. So we can't look at test fishing and use that as a reliable measure. So we just have to sit there and wait. We have no idea how close we are to be able to go or not, because we don't know what that threshold is. Another quick example is Area F. It's a troll fishery up in Haida Gwaii. Before 2019, again, our Chinook opening used to be consistently end of June, mid-July, and now it is a month later. Ever since 2019, it's in August, and that's a huge economic impact. We used to fish when the run was at its peak, so you could go out, fish your quota in a couple of weeks and go home. Now it takes us a month or more, so the overall cost to access is higher with fuel. It's also no longer as viable for small fishing boats. During the peak of the run where the fish physically are, it's smaller seas, more protected, better weather, closer to ports. Now where the fish are later in the season, it's bigger seas, much worse weather, way more exposed, days from the nearest port. So small boats economically have a hard time making it work. And to give you an idea, our vessel used to be a medium-sized vessel in the fleet, and now we're the little guy. I have another example as well from Area F that actually has figures, should time allow, that talks about what those delays look like economically.
The financial impacts that this uncertainty of when a fishery was going to open and close has had on your family, how about just the human impact that these delays in decision-making and the uncertainty surrounding them has impacted your life and that of your family?
It's stressful. It's really hard to plan a season and to make business cases. The overall mental health of fishers in general, including our family, has decreased because you don't have predictability, you don't have reliability. How do you plan your business? How do you plan your income? How do you plan your financial situation throughout the year? How do you plan when to go and not go, especially when your fishing grounds are so far away? It's a big risk to get your boat ready to go and spend all that money and invest in your gear and everything to go out when you're not even sure if you're going to be able to fish. So it's definitely a mental health situation. It's also hard on our kids to never really know what's going on. They're very resistant and very used to the lifestyle, but it is really tough when all of a sudden dad jumps up from a soccer game and he's gone for a couple of weeks because we had no idea all of a sudden we have an opening.
Very much, Mr. Gunn. Next, we're going to go to Mr. Clausen for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. It's a wealth of information that we collect from all of you. and hearing your stories, Ms. Collier. The industry, it must be a difficult lifestyle for you. And obviously, we hope to make it a little easier for you. You talked about in 2022 where the date was given at such late and short notice. I think you said you had less than 12 hours notice and you had converted your fishing boat to go to another license that you have. How far apart are the two licenses, the fishing areas that you're talking about, and how long is the travel time between the two?
So in my opening remarks, I spoke about an Area F fishery and an Area H. So Area F is around Haida Gwaii. It takes me about a week to get there. Area there than a day. But to travel to the mouth of the river where the opening was that year, it's a 2-day travel south from my location. When I said we changed over gear to our scallop fishery. So that's a local fishery, but the gear takes us 2 to 3 days to swap out. So having an 8-hour notice doesn't even allow me to change the gear on my boat.
Were you able, though, to change the gear that year, for example? And how did that affect your catch?
We did not fish sockeye that year. We were not able to change our gear. Plus, as I said, the initial release was only for 123 fish. I can't even justify the cost of fuel for only 123 fish. Economically wise, it cost us about a third of our annual income not being able to fish our salmon season that year.
Okay, that's quite an impact for you for sure. You also talked about fisheries requiring in-season decision-making. Can you expand on that a little bit? And could some decisions be made a little sooner so that they weren't as last minute from your perspective?
Yes, I don't understand exactly what is feeding these decisions or where the pinch points are, where the delays and why things can't be done quicker. It seemed that before 2019, decisions were able to be made in a more timely manner, and now they are not. And I don't know why, the reason why that is. But the reason why in-season is so important is because the salmon are moving. And over the since 2019, a lot of the opportunities that we've been given has been after the fish have gone south. So if we don't get that timely opening, we literally miss the fish because they continue moving out of our area and they're no longer there in numbers that are economically viable for us to access, which is why it's so critical that we have those faster decisions.
So you alluded to 2019. Would prior to 2019, were decisions made earlier than you've seen since 2019?
Yes, they seem to be made earlier. They seem to be made with more information, and everything was a little more reliable and consistent.
Would you think that has climate change had an impact on how these decisions are being made?
I'm not sure. I wish I understood the decision-making models within DFO, and I think that's a piece that commercial fishermen struggle with is lack of clarity and information. I mean, maybe somebody out there has the information, but the general population of fishers feel like we're making decisions, big decisions blind. We just don't have the information we need.
And last question to you. I think you said your family had been fishing for 40 years. I'm just wondering how many people do you employ in your business?
In a given season, we can employ 2 to 4 to 6. It depends on if we have the same crew or not. We're a small vessel, so usually it's my husband fishing with 2 crew, and myself, which would then make our crew 4. Sometimes our crew fluctuates through the season, but definitely 2, sometimes more.
Thank you for those comments, Mr. Dubois. You talked about, I don't really understand the ice breaking myself, not being an East Coast person. You talked about the ice breaking needs better planning. How could you see that happening? If you could expand on that a bit.
Oui, c'est ça, vu la condition de glace qu'on a.
Given the ice cap that we have very often, the date of the beginning can go from the end of March to approximately mid-April at the latest, but often we lose 2, 3, 4 days because the ice, not in the Gulf, but in the port of New Brunswick, they haven't been, the ice hasn't been broken fast enough. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Monsieur Deschênes pour 2 minutes et demie.
We are now going to Mr. Deschênes for 2.5 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I wanted to continue the discussion with you, Mr. Desbois. You explained earlier how the beginning of this season wasn't able to start as quickly as we wanted, and that it is going to make things more complicated. Is there a way for you to really give us in numbers the impact on the crab fishers? What does it mean for them when DFO and the Coast Guard is not able to open the waters early enough? Okay, first of all, it's very difficult to hire staff at the best time. You have to hire often people at least 2 weeks before, and it's before we need them. Then for sure, like this year, we're going to have a problem with the whales because the beginning is so late. So there's going to be quotas that are not going to be fulfilled, and it's going to be really hard to assess. The last couple of years, there are several guys who had, less than what they wanted. Instead of 50,000, they had 27. Because on top of it, if you have any kind of mechanical issues through that, you can't. It's almost like you can't go and fish what you have. It's really difficult to put into numbers exactly. But the losses must have been absolutely enormous for some people. So you're saying 1 day late at the beginning of the season, it means that 3 or 4 more days in June. Is that what you said? Yes. Yes, approximately, because at the rate of fishing, because of the distance you have to go, where they are. So, for example, 1 day of fuel, how much do you have to spend as a crab fisher? It's about 5,000 to 10,000 a day for the large crab fishers, to be able to move from the Gaspé coast to the Île de la Madeleine. And Mr. Desbois, what would it take for things to get better? So having better equipment would be a great thing, of course. Having the right icebreaker and a better planning, for sure. I think for me, they need a date where they could see, stop looking at the condition of the ice in the Gulf. That's not necessarily representative of all the ports in the Maritimes. And this is where the ice-breaking needs are. And this is what is delaying things year after year. Thank you very much, Mr. Deschênes.
3 minutes for the Conservatives and Liberals before we wrap the first panel. So with that, I'm going to hand the floor over to Mr. Small for 3 minutes.
I'll take that.
Okay. I'm going to hand it over to Mr. Morrison here. Welcome to the committee.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. Ms. Collier, my questions are going to be in your area. I guess what I struggle with is you have a generational history of fishing, much like our loggers in the interior and our guiders and outfitters. I know you know that you need to have fish to support your family generation after generation. Why is it so difficult for DFO to sit down and talk with our generational fisher people and get some of the expertise? Because the real experts are you, who know what's going on, not necessarily an academic who sits in Ottawa. I mean, common sense is not all that common here. Certainly isn't common in this area because of some of the challenges you have. I wonder if you could just comment on that just a little bit.
Well, there's a lot of different panels and harvest committees that do sit down with DFO. It just seems that a lot of the times the advice that's provided is not taken. I mean, I have a letter here from a harvest committee for Area F that even talks about a delay in our season for 6 days in 2023. It was a sudden last minute decision. and it was going to cost $25,000 to $50,000 to each vessel in loss of income, but it wasn't even supported by DFO's own science to support that delay. And that's the kind of stuff we're dealing with, is there's science there and advice, but it just doesn't seem to be taken into account.
Really big question. And how do we somehow change that?
I think if we knew the answer to that, we would be pushing for those solutions. I don't have a magic way of understanding how to fix that, and I wish I did.
Just one more minute for Mr. Gunn here.
Thank you, Chair. Just another quick question for you, Ms. Collier. Has this uncertainty surrounding the opening and closing dates also been exacerbated by the effects of MPAs and other spatial closures that you've in your fishing grounds that you're used to fishing in?
Absolutely. All uncertainty adds together and it makes it really challenging. I mean, a prime example is we no longer have an area H license. We chose to sell our prawn license for a variety of reasons, one of which was being displaced by MPAs, as well as a change in the fishery to fast boats, more crowded fishing areas. Our licenses were married, so we couldn't just sell that license. We had to sell the package and then try to find individual salmon licenses to purchase back that fit our vessel, that were the right length. And when we went to do that exchange, we did find them, but the license cost was so high. And when you have an area H fishery that I haven't had a meaningful open for since 2018, it's really hard to incur that cost. So yes, all of it exacerbates, all that uncertainty adds, and then you end up making these huge financial decisions, such as having to walk away from an entire license that your family's been fishing for 30 plus years.
Uncertainty around when you can go to fish. You have uncertainty around if you can even go to fish, and you have uncertainty about where you will even be allowed to send your boats to fish. And obviously these compounds, this just make it harder and harder, you think, for the next generation of fishermen to enter the market, and almost who would make any investments or try to continue in this industry at all?
So I'm afraid I have to jump in there. If you could just give a very quick answer, Ms. Collier, and then we're going to have to go to our next intervener.
I mean, absolutely. Who would want to invest that much money in licenses and boats on an industry that is so incredibly uncertain that you have no idea what kind of finance that you can support your family with?
Thank you very much, Mr. Gunn. And we're going to finish this first panel with Mr. Cormier for 3 minutes.
Merci. Et pour mes collègues.
Thank you. And for my colleagues around the table, I know that we talked a lot about the ports of my region, which are not opened in time, but there were other years where it was the ports in Nova Scotia that had problems in Prince Edward Island and in Quebec as well. The problem with the ice in the Gulf, it makes things not very safe for people to go out to sea. But Mr. Desbois, I want to come back to you. Earlier, we talked about the lack of planning of maybe the Coast Guard. We talked about a bureaucratic process that maybe is a bit heavy, but at the end of the day, but if we don't have the equipment that is enough to de-ice those ports, those channels, so that people can go out fishing, we're not getting any further. So I want to make sure that I hear you well. What are your recommendations so that we can have an earlier opening of the fishing? What would it be? Our fishers think that having a date for the ice breaking for the Coast Guard, that would really help the situation. It would help with their planning independently of the ice situation in the Gulf. But the date, Mr. Desbois, I think they already have it because they know that DFO says, there's measures for the protection of whales, and we know that we have to get out fishing as soon as possible. So they know that they have to de-ice those seaports as soon as possible. But at the end of the day, if they don't have tools to do this, we have a problem. So wouldn't you agree that we should have our own tools to be able to have those outings earlier? Okay, we didn't say that there was no tools. Last year on April 2, we were out to sea. This year, why is it April 6? I know that the conditions were the same, but we do have some tools. So you must have some planning so that people can use the tools that we have. So some of these tools, they've been here We're talking about the grenouille for the ports of Caraquet and Chicanau. We're talking about the biggest icebreakers that are going out further to sea. And we have the smaller one that came all the way to Capustrand. But where you are, there is one for a very, very large area, and then small icebreakers that can come to the channels that are, less deep, but they're used for the big lakes. So with all the measures that we have to protect the right whale and the stress on your industry, don't you think that there should be more accent put on our region so that we should have our own tools so that we don't have the same problem every year? Okay, I mean, having our own tools, for sure, that would be good. I don't know how we'd get there, but yes, it would be the ideal situation. Yes. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Desbois. Thank you, Mr. Cormier.
I do want to thank our witnesses for joining today and providing some really important testimony for our study that is surely going to help inform some recommendations to government from that. But with that, we're going to briefly suspend while we welcome our next panel. make a few comments for the benefits of our new witnesses. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. And for those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you're not speaking. Et en ce qui concerne l'interprétation.
And in regard to interpretation, for those on Zoom, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen between floor, English, and French. And for those who are in the room, you can use your earpiece and choose the desired channel.
I'd like to welcome our new witnesses, appearing by video conference from the British Columbia Salmon Purse Seiners Association. We have Michael Griswold. From the Serengeti Fishing Charters, we have David Summers. And from Vancouver Sports Fishing Guides Association, we have Warren Barker and Yvonne Chu. So with that, we're going to start with witnesses' opening statements for 5 minutes or less, starting with Mr. Griswold.
I will give my statement there. It might not be verbatim to what I submitted to the committee there, but here goes. I am a longtime fisherman. I fished for 46 years. Salmon, I fished herring, fished dogfish, fished prawns, a few other things there. I have been involved in co-management with the Department of Fisheries there for many of those years, since 1982 to be exact. And I was a industry advisor to the Canadian-U.S. negotiations, which resulted in the Pacific Salmon Treaty. And as a result of that, I was appointed to the Fraser Panel at its inception in 1985. And I had been on the Fraser Panel for approximately 40 years until 2025, when I, as a matter of conscience, found that I had to resign from that position because I found that there had been some significant changes that were occurring within the department that basically had left a large component of the stakeholder community out of those decisions. And so it was a strategic resignation. It was meant to bring notice to what was happening in 2025, which was that there was a very, very large run of sockeye salmon, which was unanticipated, and that the department had found no way to provide meaningful commercial access to that fish. And I found that in my history there on the Fraser Panel of co-management, that was a significant change, that it was an alteration that this industry could not withstand. If we in this fishing industry, the BC Salmon Purse Seiners Association, trawlers, gillnetters, all rely upon fish there for their livelihoods there. And we have been sitting back for a while there without very much opportunity there because there wasn't very much opportunity, because there wasn't very much fish. But this year in 2025, because of the unexpected abundance, we just forgot how to manage the fisheries. And I thought that the department needed a wake-up call. So that being said, we are now embarking upon a new year in 2026. It is what they call an Adams dominant year, which is expected to be a lot of fish. And we have seen an opening there within DFO there and the other communities that have a bearing on how fish are managed in British Columbia, that they're willing to at least talk to us there, which was not really happening last year. And this is all well and fine. However, that there is no formal agreement here. The department, DFO, and the government have entered into relationship there with a body of First Nation groups. They're on the salmon management plans, that specifically sockeye and Chinook there in the Fraser River. And it is a formal agreement. There's a memorandum of understanding. And that provides them, the First Nations, sort of priority in how escapement goals, which is the underlining foundation of how we manage fish, are set. We in the non-native community need some kinds of reassurances and guarantees that our needs and wants are also taken into account. Because there will be a change of administrations there sometime in the future there, and there will be, unless there is something down in black and white, we do not have the protections that they have given us this year, but were absent last year. So what we're asking for is that we need to be have our needs and wants considered, and that we are willing to work in a roundtable with other stakeholders, particularly First Nations, who have a very strong, call on this resource there. But that call also should not be taken into a meaning that it diminishes other stakeholders' resources, such as the commercial fishing community and the recreational fishing community. So I'm willing to further expand on this there, but I'll leave my comments at that there. I just should note there that this last year in 2025, we ended up with a run of 19 million pink salmon, and the total commercial catch of Fraser River pink salmon last year was 27,000 pieces. We ended up with a run of around 9.5 million sockeye, and the total commercial catch of that was around 150,000. This is abysmally low, and we do not want to find ourselves in that circumstance again. So I'll leave my comments at that.
Next, we're going to go to Mr. Summers for 5 minutes or less.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee, for inviting me here today. It's a pleasure. As I actually graduated from Carleton University, and what I like to think was just a short while ago. My name is David Summers, and I own and run our family business, Serengeti Fishing Charters, in Port Hardy on northern Vancouver Island for the past 20 years. We take guests from all over Canada and the U.S., fishing primarily for Chinook salmon and halibut, but also lingcod, rockfish, and coho salmon. I have also recently become involved in various committees and working groups on the Sport Fishing Advisory Board. To say the purview of this study relates not only to my company, but also the entire sector would be an understatement. Unexpected and inconsistent closures truly would destroy our sector, my business, and my ability to provide for my family. While I have a deep love for the fishery, my primary motivation is supporting my family, my wife and our 2 daughters, Sage Grace, named after a fishing rod, and Kaya Sailor. As their names suggest, our connection to the ocean and fishing runs deep. It's not just a passion, but a meaningful part of who we are. Like so many families on the West Coast, we do not live near the ocean, we live on it. While on the East Coast, the commercial fishery has deep impacts on social fabric of communities. On the West Coast, it is in fact the recreational fishery, or a public fishery as I refer to it, that runs deep in our culture. The public fishery in British Columbia plays a significant social role by enhancing connections between people and nature. For many in our small local communities, fishing is more of a pastime. It is a way of life that brings family and friends together. Activities like salmon fishing are deeply embedded in our coastal identity. The public fishery also allows many to get out into the wilderness and heighten their personal environmental responsibility, potentially creating more environmental conscious-minded individuals going forward. Further to the social importance to the coast, the public fishery is an economic driver of BC's blue or ocean economy. Our sector's salmon fishery has similar economic impact as the snow crab fishery on the East Coast, and the public fishery as a whole contributes the second most to any fisheries in Canada's GDP, only behind the lobster fishery. Our fishery brings the most money into the economy with the least amount of environmental impact and the least amount of actually fish harvested. Historically, our sector has harvested only 7.02% of salmon on BC's coasts and only 15% of halibut. Yet we contribute more to the economy than all commercial fisheries, aquaculture, and fish processing combined. My company alone has 4 full-time employees, 6 part-time employees, and spends near $750,000 annually with other Vancouver Island businesses. Port Hardy has 13 charter operators doing this, plus literally hundreds of people who bring their own boat with their families to the area. This is only Port Hardy. Never mind other coastal communities with significantly more public fisheries activity like Port Renfrew, Bamfield, Gold River, and Port Alberni. I could name dozens more. It It is not only the charter operators that benefit from this, but local restaurants and hotels, fish processors, mechanic shops, tackle stores, marinas, fuel docks, grocery stores, and the list keeps going. All could not survive without this industry in our town, as it has become an economic driver, while our other resource industries, forestry, mining, and aquaculture, continue to struggle. And what is the biggest economic threat to these coastal towns and their public fisheries economies? Closures that are not based on data or science and come with very little notice. Whether it's closures due to killer whales, restrictions, or Fraser River stocks concern, over the last 10 years, DFO has created policy after policy that hurts the public fishery. Now we are in the middle of a salmon allocation policy review that truly could ruin our public salmon fishery on the coast of BC and all the economic and social benefits that accompany it. Family and guests plan their trips over a year in advance. It is vital that we have stability in our fishery, and proposed changes to the allocation policy would result in uncertainty on openings, closures, and even our already minimal harvest limits. My family is my worldview, as many of you can relate. Without a consistent and reliable fishery, I could not provide for them, and the same could be said for thousands more families across the coast. Any early closures or closures based not on data or science would take the ability away from me to ensure my family and many others on the coast are economically secure. I thank you for your time, and I look forward to any questions you might have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Summers. And we are going to conclude with opening remarks from Mr. Barker for 5 minutes or less.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. I'll be sharing my comments along with Ivan Chu, who's also a part of the Vancouver Sports Fishing Guides Association. My name is Warren Barker. I'm the president of the Vancouver Sports Fishing Guides Association. 20 years of guiding experience, second generation fishing guide, and we represent the Vancouver Sports Fishing Guides Association, about 25 charter boats. The importance of recreational fishing, salmon fishing, coho and Chinook are integral to BC's cultural, economic, and tourism identity. These species support globally recognized recreational fishery that attracts visitors from all over Canada and internationally. British Columbia is widely regarded as a premier salmon fishing destination, contributing significantly to tourism revenues. Impacts of delayed regulation decisions. Approximately 80% of our customers participating in fishing charters in the Greater Vancouver area travel from outside British Columbia. Delays in announcing fishing regulations limit visitors' ability to travel and book accommodations, increasing costs due to last-minute bookings, and reduce overall tourism activity. For charter operators, uncertainty prevents effective business planning and advanced bookings. Peak tourism demands occur in July and August, which often coincides with Chinook retention closures, further reducing our ability to produce revenue. Regional inequities in fisheries access, current management measures create significant disparities between regions. Chinook fisheries in Vancouver area, Strait of Georgia, Burrard Inlet, and Howe Sound are closed from April 1st to August 31st, while fisheries on the eastern side of the strait, i.e. Nanaimo and up near Gibsons, open at July 15th. These differences place Metro Vancouver-based operators with competitive disadvantage and need to travel across the strait constrained by weather conditions, rising fuel costs, and customer affordability. Since 2019, the businesses in the Vancouver area have experienced, in certain times of year, a 65% decline as a result of Chinook closures.
Hi, my name is Ivan Chu. I am the Vice President of the Vancouver Sports Fishing Guides Association. My background in fishing starts when I was a young boy growing up in Steveston, which is a community commercial fishing village. And my job back then as a teenager was working in the fish cannery. And then and it was such a good living that my brother and I at 15, 16 years old was making more money per hour than my father was working for Canadian Pacific Airlines. And we worked there every summer in the fish cannery, and then I also went fishing with my friends who were all Japanese fishermen, their dads were, and we went and learned how to fish. So I grew up fishing. I became a police officer, and I maintained my fishing, became a fishing guide on the weekends and on my days off to support my family of three, because my wife chose to stay at home to raise kids while I did my job, and I also had a small boat where I could take people fishing. I'll get into what are scientific evidence and missed opportunities of DFO-funded test fisheries for the last 2 years in 24 and 25. We've had test fisheries in the month of April and May in Howe Sound, and where they go out and intentionally catch fish to take DNA samples with. And of all the fish caught, 90% of the legal size Chinook salmon were of hatchery origin. And they were either clipped, meaning the adipose was missing, so they came from most likely an American hatchery, or some test hatcheries that were clipping Chinooks, because we were not clipping Chinooks at 100% rate. They were only clipping anywhere from 10 to 15% at a local hatcheries. So, but the fish that they were caught were in the 90 percentile range of hatchery origin. What is significant is that there is a mark selective fishery 17 miles away from us and beyond, where they're allowed to fish April and May in the southern Gulf Islands and around Victoria and further up the coast for hatchery Chinook salmon in April, May. We are not allowed to. So that is a big economic hardship on our local operators and for our tourism, because they would just rather jump on a ferry and go fish with somebody across. And we tell them to. We tell clients, he says, if you want to keep fish, go across, fish the southern Gulf Islands, go to Victoria, spend your money there, and be able to retain a salmon.
And sorry, Mr. Chu, we are at time, so if you can conclude that, there'll be some time for questions, of course.
And then we've already talked about this, Mr. Summers, and other guests previous to us. $1.3 billion worth of revenue is generated from our fishing industry, recreational fishing industry, 9,100 jobs, and then 5% of tourism dollars in British Columbia comes directly from people coming to British Columbia to go fishing. The other point we want to make is the Southern Wales restrictions on us. Right now, North Arm area is closed and has been since 2019 during our prime time return, which is summertime. And so we're not allowed to fish there, forcing us to go further towards the South Arm and the Middle Arm. Now with the proposed closures, they're looking at closing the South Arm area, meaning that everybody that fishes Metro Vancouver are going to go to one small area to fish. So we're really affected by that, what's coming on. And
sorry, I'm going to have to jump in there. We're quite a bit over time here. So we're going to go into the first round of questioning, the 6-minute round with Mr. Gunn.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Summers, off the coast of Vancouver Island, DFO is actively considering additional fishing closures and restrictions on top of those already in place, whether for the notional goal of protecting killer whales or this weak stock management on the Fraser. Do you believe these proposed closures would be based on abundance, science, and evidence, or based on ideology?
I would say it depends on where you are. The additional ones that they're looking at that I've seen in at the Sport Fishing Main Board meeting would be based more so on ideology, in the sense that they're only listening to one stakeholder, not all stakeholders that are involved. So
why do you think they're pushing ahead with these decisions and not taking into account the views of all stakeholders?
Well, I think ever since since 2015, essentially, fisheries has become on the West Coast anyway, a pawn, especially the public fishery, for in the reconciliation game, if you will. So we give up a lot of what more restrictions for one user group, which, in certain places, FSC fishery does have priority over us, which is absolutely fair, as does commercial indigenous fisheries. But I do wish that DFO would listen more to all stakeholders, as it affects everyone on the coast's livelihoods and ability to go out and fish.
And do you believe, obviously there's been a lot of talk about the salmon allocation policy review. In your view, could it affect the opening and closing dates for recreational fishers such as yourself?
Absolutely. It would be the biggest thing in my lifetime to affect it. My understanding is that they're looking at putting a cap or quota system on our Chinook and Cove fishery. That would most likely result in maybe mid-August, beginning of August, even late July, closure on certain species. Some places, like mentioned before, don't even open until August 31st.
What Those, if the opening date, for example, was pushed back, what would that mean for your business, your family, in coastal communities like Port Hardy?
Well, it would be devastating, obviously, especially August is the first or second most busy month in Port Hardy for fisheries between July and August. So if all of a sudden you take half of that out, that's half of our revenue and half of our ability to make a living for our families. And most of our costs are fixed too, so it would almost make the business unsustainable.
And, you know, as looking back over the past few years, we've had this big increase in technology, obviously, everywhere, and the amount of resources, the DFO. Has the way that they've been able to communicate opening and closing dates gotten better or worse in recent years?
Worse in the sense that, like the IFMP, the Integrated Fisheries Management Plan, this year, for example, isn't coming out till June 30th. In the past, it would come out in March or April. Alaska announces their Chinook limits for the year in March. So my season, I have guests showing up on July 1st. I can't tell them with 100% certainty that they're going to be allowed to keep a Chinook. I can tell them in the past they would be able to, but I can't tell them for sure because the IFMP for that year doesn't come out until June 30th.
And we hear a lot here in Ottawa these days about there being a quote-unquote new government. Have you noticed any changes in how DFO makes and announces decisions since Mark Carney became Prime Minister?
Not yet. I'm hopeful because I know he was elected on an economic priority, and the public fishery contributes, like I said earlier, the most to the economy of the coast over all fisheries combined. So I hope so. The mass marking announcement was a welcome thing for our community, but other than that, I would say that not yet anyway.
Next question is for Mr. Griswold. Can you explain why the Fraser River sockeye opening was so late and the catch opportunity so limited despite the near record returns here in the past summer?
Well, the timing of it wasn't necessarily late. It usually happens around the first week of August there. The problem was that the forecast this year for 2025 was approximately a quarter of what returned. And part of the problem, and a significant part of the problem, was that there was a component of the Fraser sockeye with the late runs there, which were essentially all expected to die in transit there. There has been problems with late-run sockeye for many years, starting in 1996, 1998, and that the management plan basically assumed that these fish were going to die. It was sort of the marching orders that the Pacific Salmon Commission had given there. And the problem, one of our significant problems is that those fish did not die this year. And they actually survived. They survived very well. But the management, no, they did not. You know, basically, they were looking at a magic date there of September 13th in the Fraser River there as the date that says, well, anything that passes by Mission after September 13th was going to live. Everything before that was going to die. And therein lies part of the problem there. If they expected that all of these fish were going to die beforehand, might there not have been an opportunity to harvest those fish that were not going to survive in addition to the surplus summer stocks? And that is sort of it's a double jeopardy there for the commercial fishing fleet because we're paying two times. We're paying once because there's the assumption that things are going to die, and then we pay because we lose that access there. And so, you know, to get back to it there, the department.
We're over.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah.
Austin for 6 minutes.
Sorry.
Witnesses for being here. Mr. Griswold, in your statement, your speaking notes that you submitted to us, about in 2025, it became known that the 2025 run size far exceeded the preseason forecast. When was the forecast prediction made known, and can you talk a bit about how the forecast is created, and when did it become known the actual run was different?
The forecast is generally presented to the fishing community there from the Pacific Salmon Commission in February. And the forecast is derived from a bunch of different scientific analyses there. And a lot of it's based on the returns to spawners there from the previous, from the brood there. And so it is, there are other considerations such as marine survival, projected marine survival, there, freshwater survival. If there's smolder enumeration that is done on a couple of runs there. But it all goes into this big mixing pot there, and out of it comes the forecast there. So the forecast was derived primarily because it was considered to be, the last few years have not been very kind to Fraser sockeye, and things were not coming back very well. Well, this year in 2025 was a big surprise, and we began to see the beginnings of the survival, the increase in marine survival there with the earliest component, which was the early Stewart run, which came back approximately 7 times greater than the forecast. And then the other runs started to follow suit, not quite to that same extent, but every component of the Fraser run, the early Stewarts, the early Summers, the Summers, and the Lates all came back significantly greater than the forecast there. And so by the time the middle of August came along, we had a big run.
To Mr. Summers here, the announcement that you alluded to and PSSI, how will these announcements, will they be helpful to the recreational fishers?
Yeah, absolutely. They will be too. They obviously need to be coupled with other things. For example, a good announcement, the minister announcing that the salmon allocation policy maybe remain unchanged would be one of those, because if we don't have opportunities, there won't be volunteers for these hatcheries to do all this. So every hatchery that I know up and down the coast has hundreds and hundreds of hours of volunteer work from public fishers going there and helping out. Well, if they don't have an opportunity to catch those Chinook and keep them, I doubt that you would see that kind of volunteer engagement as well.
Okay, and back to you, Mr. Summers. You did talk about fishing being the economic driver in the small West Coast communities, and obviously we want to ensure that the fisheries and the small family businesses carry on. Have you seen a decline in the industry, or are you only forecasting that there will be a decline, and how can we prevent a decline from happening?
Yeah, there's definitely been a decline since 2019 when the Fraser River 5.2 restrictions came in. No longer can I fish 5 minutes from the dock until July 15th. I have to run an hour to an hour and 10 minutes. Locals who have small boats, any boat under 24, 25 feet, don't have the ability to run up to where I run to go fish. So it has really restricted even locals to go and have the ability to catch salmon 5 minutes from the dock for a majority of the summer.
Okay, and to Mr. Chu, you talked about the killer whales, which we all want to make sure that we keep the population going. How does this affect your industry, and do the current policies around the killer whales, from your perspective, do they need to be revised?
Yes, right now I've said that the north arm is closed of the Fraser River, big section of it, so we can't fish there during prime fishing season. And they're proposing to close the south arm as well, and then force this into the middle in between the two closures, so everybody will have to fish there. What is, we should adapt the American policy, which is a bubble zone. So if you're within, which they have in Canada now, we used to be 400 meters, now we're 1,000 meters if there's killer whales involved. But you can't have a static closure for 3 months, hoping that whales might show up there to feed. and then keep us out of there, and then have us also move away 1,000 meters if there's a killer whale. And of the 8 whale monitoring associations out there, agencies, there's been 1 sighting of the southern resident killer whales in 2024 on September the 13th. That's the only sighting. There hasn't been a sighting yet at the North Arm since 2019 when they closed it. There hasn't been a sighting there, and there's been 1 sighting in 2024 during our fishing season down in September at the South Arm, and to this date, up to date now, there's been 1 sighting of killer whales up by Keats Island, which is Howe Sound area, and they were transient killer whales, not the southern resident killer whales. So yes, we want to protect the whales, but we should move to the bubble zone and not have static closures. And that's what we're trying to get across to the DFO.
Thank you very much, Mr. Clausen. Et prochainement, on va à Monsieur Deschênes pour 6 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Mes questions seraient pour Monsieur Michael.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is for Mr. Griswold.
Je ne le vois pas.
I don't see Mr. Griswold anymore. Are you there, Mr. Griswold?
Yes, I am. There I am.
Monsieur Griswold, l'interprétation est bonne?
Do you hear me? Do you hear
Yes,
the
I-
interpretation?
Yes, I do.
Dans votre
Mr. Griswold, in your speech, you were explaining that you've had to quit the Fraser panel against your wishes, really, because you were trying to make a point. Because you said that you felt that the process was being corrupt when it came to commercial fishing. Why did you write this?
I wrote that because I felt it. Basically, I had given my life there, 40 years of my life, to the Fraser River management process, and with that, working on behalf of Canada there for the Fraser River panel. And as I said in my statement there, I worked collaboratively with the DFO, and we were able to negotiate fishing plans that were based upon conservation and whatnot there. And in 2025, things changed. That there was an iron door in front of expanding opportunities there where the conditions warranted. The warranted conditions this year was that the run came back 4 times greater than the forecast there. And that, under normal circumstances, would have allowed more fishing. But the department would not allow expanded opportunities there, basically because they had made an arrangement with a group called the Fraser River Salmon Management Board that basically stymied, it blocked any opportunity there because the anticipation that they wanted to put a lot of fish onto the spawning grounds, which is another issue there. But that was my issue, is that there were significant changes in how the department, was allowing opportunities to go fishing, allowing openings, and it needed a spotlight on it. And the only way I could figure to put the spotlight on it was by doing a very public resignation.
And therefore, when you say the system was corrupt, if I understand you, and so the deciders at the DFO did not make a rigorous decision based on facts, but rather would have made a decision to promote certain interests.
Well, I wouldn't say that the system was corrupt. I think that the system had changed there, and there were a whole bunch of new players there from both DFO and from other groups there that influenced the decision making, and they did so. And I, in my sort of kind way of putting it is I think they did that very naively. They thought, and this is a common misperception there by a lot of people. If you put more fish on the spawning grounds on salmon streams, you always get more return. That's not necessarily the case. And in this particular case, that was the guiding influence there of why DFO, in conjunction with the Fraser River Salmon Management Board, went the way they did. And there was enough information, in my 40 years of participating there, I have learned a few things. And it is my estimation that putting all this extra fish on the spawning grounds could actually have negative effects there, not necessarily good effects there. And unfortunately, they were not listening to me. They weren't listening to others that were saying the same things.
So at that time, how were you to understand what the DFO was doing? Were they were trying to please which group in particular?
Well, they had entered into a formal arrangement with Fraser River First Nations. It's not this NEM. It was some marine area, and it's called the Fraser River Salmon Management Board. And basically, they had provided through a memorandum of understanding the right there for that group to set the escapement goals. And as I said earlier, that setting the escapement goals is the foundation for fisheries management, in-time fisheries management. And so it was their naive belief there on some of those established escapement goals there, which had that very negative effect on all our fisheries, particularly, as I said earlier, upon the late run, which basically was the determining factor on how we managed to fish there in 2025, because all salmon stocks tend to mix together. Some of them come earlier, some of them come later there, but at some point they overlap. And you might have a whole bunch of abundant stocks, but if they're overlapped with smaller stocks or less abundant stocks, then you sort of fish to the lowest common denominator. In this case, the late runs basically necessitated a 10% harvest rate, or that's what they obligated, a 10% harvest rate, which basically was a lot less than the 50% that we were allowed on the summer runs or the early summer runs there. So,
thank you very much, Mr. Deschênes.
One with Mr. Small for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm going to start off my time by putting a motion on notice here. Mr. Chair, considering the concerns around the publishing of the report 4 wind areas in the offshore of Nova Scotia, a description of the primary marine ecosystem features, significant and protected areas, at-risk and depleted species, fish and fisheries, science surveys, and other human uses that may occur in and around French Bank, Middle Bank, Sable Island Bank, and Sydney Bight areas in the Canadian Manuscript Report of Fisheries and Aquatic Systems 3312, that pursuant to Standing Order 1081A, the Department of Fisheries and Oceans be ordered to provide to the committee all, within 30 days of the adoption of this motion, the following. All documents including but not limited to memoranda, briefing notes, and internal communications related to the decision to produce this report, including any request for its preparation and associated allocation of resources. All documents related to the timing of the report's public release, including any correspondence of briefings concerning its publication in relation to announcements on offshore wind development for the Scotian Shelf. All documents related to internal review processes for the report, including any peer review, interbranch consultations, or assessments conducted within DFO, including science and fisheries management. All documents relating to consultations or lack thereof within the fishing industry in the preparation of the report. All documents relating to the omission of integrated fisheries management plans, recovery potential assessments, or SARA required recovery strategies in the report, and all internal communications, records of decisions, briefing materials, analysis, and other documents related to the use of this report in departmental decision-making. And that pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee undertakes 1 2-hour meeting with the Department of Fisheries and Ocean officials, and that the meeting takes place 1 week after all requested documentation is received by all members of the committee, and the scope of the meeting be on the report. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Now,
the motion's been received. Obviously, you need to give 48 hours notice, so it can't be moved at this time. But yeah, it's now been received.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Now, a question to Mr. Griswold. Mr. Griswold, how could DFO have gotten last year's Fraser sockeye estimate so dreadfully wrong?
It is one of the surprises that happens in salmon, Pacific salmon management there. We have had really good surprises and bad surprises. And the great unknown is what happens in marine survival. And the marine survival for salmon, basically they spend 2 years in freshwater and then they go out in the ocean. And it was really benign, and there was nothing. There were signs, but there was no definitive sign that said that we were going to see this increased marine survival. In 2010, we ended up with a run that was 30 million sockeye there. That was almost 2.5 times bigger than was expected. And it was just also a product of marine survival. Marine survival also can cut the life right out of the fishery there too. And what happened was that we had been experiencing bad marine survival for a while. And that might have had some influence, downward influence on the forecast, but not that much. And nobody was really expecting quite the surplus, the bounty that came back last year. That it was a good surprise.
The minister is ultimately responsible for decisions that affect livelihoods amongst groups like we have here today at this committee. Do you think that the government cares about you?
I think that it is one component of their job there to care, but they basically sometimes it is eclipsed by other issues there. And sometimes it's hard to understand why. And, in particular, there's another fishery that I participate in. It's called the BC chum salmon fishery. And we are sort of locked in this unfortunate circumstance where we've had half of our fishery taken away in order to protect interior Fraser steelhead, even though in the group that I participated in, we had only caught something like 40 of them there over the last little while. But it is basically decimated half of our livelihood there. And so when we ask whether the department or the minister cares, that is hard to balance with those decisions that have eliminated those opportunities there. And so we are asking at least to get, real science, real data before the minister there to provide her with better decision-making tools there that might provide us the kind of relaxation there in the restrictions that we're seeing. So it's a mixed message. Yeah, she cares, but she's balances against other things there too.
Mr. Small, next we are going to go to Mr. Morrissey for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Excuse me. First question to Mr. Summers. You began answering a question on mass marking and PSSI as it impacts the recreational fishery. Could you expand? You ran out of time, but advise the committee do you see this as a progress step?
Absolutely, it's a progress step. Absolutely. Okay. But it on its own doesn't. It helps certain areas for sure, but it definitely needs to be coupled with other things as well. The fishery is in decline, no doubt, like I mentioned earlier, and it won't just be one thing like a mass marking 100% of our hatchery fish that's going to save it. So there definitely needs to be more steps taken, and allowing access to British Columbian Canadians to the fish that are a public resource.
But you did state the fishery is in decline.
Sorry?
You did state the fishery is in decline.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I mean like the public fishery is in decline.
Yeah. So prudently, you would have to take some steps to prevent it from total decimation. Thanks. Mr. Chu, you referenced bubble zone, and I believe you made some reference to that. Could you explain the difference between Canada and the USA? Explain a bit more.
Sure. A bubble zone is like if we're fishing and killer whales are present, we have to pick up our gear and move at least 1,000 meters or 1 kilometer away, and that's everybody. So when the pod of whales have gone through, go back to fishing. Whereas we have static closure, meaning this whole area is out of bounds. And whether the whales are there or not, it's just simply out of bounds. And Washington State has adopted the bubble zone, which they find works really well, where if there's killer whales present, pick up your gear and go, and you generally know when killer whales are present because the whale watching boats are there.
To the committee, the U.S. adopting this in the state of Washington, has there been any negative impact on the killer whale population there because of them using that methodology?
No, because we're staying away from the whales. They're staying away from them. Because prior
so why
to that,
should Canada follow a different protocol than the U.S.?
I don't know why, but they've just brought in the bubble zone as part of the law now, and so but they still
Who brought in as part of the law? The U.S. or Canada?
No, Canada did.
Canada did.
They're following what the U.S. did.
So we're going.
So we have the
in line.
bubble zone now. It's taking effect, but we also have the static closure, which means we can't go in that area where the fish are because it's closed for the killer whales, and there's no scientific data to show that they were there. And like in the last 2 years, there's been one sighting in the new area which they're proposing, which is the South Arm, and that was in September of 2024, and 0 in the North Arm where they've had it closed for 6 years now.
Okay, thank you. Question to Mr. Griswold. Mr. Griswold, you made a number of comments, good and bad surprises, and then you also was referencing real science. Real science is a term I hear quite often in this committee from witnesses presenting, depending on which side of the science they're falling on. Could you explain? Could you expand to the committee your definition of real science?
Well, real science is something that has a foundation of data. It has real information that is it is sometimes it's compromised data there, and in my allusion there to the chum fishery there, it is somewhat mixed there, because what happens there for our chum fishery in British Columbia is that if there's any encounter whatsoever with a steelhead there we were looking at conducting test fisheries to basically establish whether there was a real steelhead problem, that the demonstration fishery would be shut down immediately because of that one encounter. That does not provide any scientific information for the study, the necessary study. And so it is, as I say, compromise there. What is needed is that we come to a common understanding of the criteria that's needed for demonstration fisheries, test fisheries, or whatever. And if that is that will hopefully provide real results. Whether it's good for us or bad for us, we can live with that outcome. But if we don't get the opportunity to undertake those demonstrations, we don't know, and that's compromised.
Et prochainement, on va pour 2 minutes et demie.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. J'aimerais poursuivre.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to continue my discussion with Mr. Griswold. I'd like to really understand what your allegation was all about and if the system was corrupt. A little while ago, you said, or you talked about the agreement between the DFO and the group that you mentioned, the Fraser River First Nation. How was that agreement stopping the DFO from making a proper agreement?
Essentially, what happened was that the Fraser River Salmon Management Board mandated that there would only be a 10% harvest rate on late runs. And unfortunately, because of the abundance there, we ended up taking that 10% very early in the season. And that obliterated any further fishing opportunity. In normal circumstances, we would have seen that the run size had increased, and that though there was expected problems with the late runs, we would have also increased the margin, the allowance of the late run catch. And that would have further, provided greater opportunity for us to access pink salmon and more abundant summer runs there. And so it was a mandate that was put forward by the Fraser River Salmon Management Board that DFO, basically, as they are participants in it, it's a bilateral group between Fraser River First Nations and DFO. They basically acceded to that demand there, and they would not move from any expanded harvest there. So, and the expanded harvest, additional harvest there, in my estimation, was warranted, and that's why I resigned.
Okay. Merci beaucoup. Merci.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Mr. Deschênes?
4 minutes. So with that, I'm going to turn the floor over to Mr. Morrison for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think, Mr. Griswold, just not to hammer on this too hard, but did DFO learn anything from 2025? For example, quicker change. And I think more importantly, you mentioned also in your opening statement, talked about stakeholders at the roundtable, government officials, Indigenous. Do you think that DFO is going to learn from this and perhaps have from expertise from actual fishermen who know what's going to happen if they don't follow some of the science, the real science you're talking about?
Yeah, I am optimistic there for 2026. They basically came back, and I think they acknowledged that there were problems last year, and they won't accept necessarily that they were to blame for them. And I'm not going to point fingers either. I just want to say that we cannot do things like we did last year, and that a roundtable there in which all the stakeholders are yet to put their views forward, and that as a roundtable there's no vetoes, and that was the problem that happened last year. Yeah, and the roundtable provides that expertise.
This is for Mr. Chu. Ivan, first of all, thank you for your 34 years in policing, law enforcement with RCMP and New West Police Department. Thank you for that. On the guiding part, we talked a little bit earlier, and are the numbers that you have for hatchery origin salmon are different than DFO, somewhat different. How can we address that? Like, when will DFO finally bring in experts like guiders to help them to develop policies rather than going off and not even actually listening to what you're saying?
The study they did over the last 2 years were fishing in Howe Sound through April and May, and sampled thousands of fish that they caught, and of which they took DNA samples, of which that's how they determined that 90% of the legal size salmon they caught were hatchery origin. That report is sitting somewhere on somebody's desk, and that's why we don't have a mark selective fishery for 2026, because they're still sitting on the reports from 24 and 25, and until they get the report out and let the minister make her decision to open a mark selective fishery, that's where we're sitting.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Morrison, and I'm going to just take the last round of questioning we have for the last 4 minutes we have. And I do want to pick up on the questions from Mr. Morrison here. Mr. Chu, you mentioned, you spoke to the disparity of a number of areas in the South Coast, particularly around the Gulf Islands having access to retention in a selected fishery, but not having that same opportunity in Howe Sound. And what to you, how do you justify this disparity in the two areas?
I look at it as a total economic disadvantage to our local guides and also our local fishermen, the recreational fishing sector, because we can go catch and release, but we can't keep one hatchery salmon, whereas 18 miles away, they can do it. And as well as July 15th, on the Nanaimo side of the strait, they can keep a salmon under 80 centimeters, which we can't keep until September 1st. So as fishing guides, we're taking out clients, and we tell them, if we're just 17 miles to our west, you would have been able to keep that fish. And they look at us and go, why? And we were trying to explain to them about decisions made, and it really, it's hampered our business. We're losing a lot of business because our clients will phone people on the island, say, can we keep a salmon, or can you keep any salmon? And plus they also have the ability to keep lingcod, which we can't keep yet, and they also have the ability to catch halibut. So doing business on the Vancouver side is very difficult for those reasons.
Absolutely, and I know layering on this the impact of the pandemic, of course, on a lot of other fishing businesses. And actually, we've had a couple of witnesses last week that spoke to the same concern about the lack of access in Howe Sound. Of course, a couple weeks ago, we did have the announcement of mass marking for salmon on the South Coast and the hatcheries. What impact do you see this having on the potential of having access to a mark-selected fishery in an area like Howe Sound?
Because there'll be more fish that are missing the adipose fin, because if we go to the American route where they mass mark 100% of all their hatchery fish, coho and Chinooks, and we go to mass marking of 100% of our Chinook salmon, then the majority of the fish that we catch in Howe Sound are hatchery fish. Then we have the ability to keep fish, and then more people will be able to participate in recreational fishing and also using guide services.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chu. And then my last questions, I'm going to ask we'll probably get one question into Mr. Griswold. First, thank you for your longstanding work as part of the Fraser panel of the Pacific Salmon Commission. One thing that you spoke to, I wanted to just get your opinion on it, and that was you mentioned the negative effects of allowing a sufficient amount of harvest on that amount of salmon returning to the Fraser. I was hoping you could explain why that is an issue, and as we look forward or look ahead to how this issue could be approached this year and future years on the Fraser and otherwise.
Well, in this last year in 2025, the late run component was all expected to die en route there before it got to the spawning grounds. There was not expected to be very much, and so whatever stragglers they could get to the spawning grounds there, it was considered, okay, that was a plus there. The issue was that this is a relatively recent phenomenon of this early mortality of the late runs there. And nobody really knows why it happened, is whether it was predation or, chemical contaminants in the river or whatever, but there was something that was forcing those fish to not delay. However, in 2025, these fish ended up reverting back to their normal migratory behavior, which allowed them to delay. What we need to do in order to get us out of this sort of box there is that we need more assessment there. We need better assessments there in the Strait of Georgia, off of the mouth of the Fraser, to see whether these fish are migrating in the river or if they're holding. And if they are holding, it basically tells us that there is not much of a problem. And that was one of the recommendations that was put forward last year, was for assessment fisheries. And unfortunately, there was not enough resources there to enable that there. And it basically is going to be, necessary for, some scientific collaboration there to agree on the formation and how it goes about there. But that's the answer there. It is more information.
Griswold, and I'm afraid that's going to conclude this. I want to thank all of our witnesses for being here in person and by video conference. It's very interesting testimony, and I know there was mentions of recommendations. And if there was anything that we didn't get to, you're always welcome to submit that in writing to the committee as well as we move forward to finalize the report that'll flow from this. But with that, so our next meeting is going to be Wednesday, where we're going to resume our study of Atlantic mackerel and Atlantic herring fisheries. And meeting adjourned.